Hey, what is going on, guys? In this video today, we're going to be going over the best sensitivity values and settings specifically for console Fortnite players. I always knew that sensitivity felt different on console compared to controller on PC because of the difference in FPS. But it wasn't until I personally experienced going back to console that I realized how big that difference actually was. Now, maybe not everybody feels that way, especially if you're good at controlling faster sensitivities, but when I hopped on console and tried using my PC sense, it didn't feel very comfortable at all. So what I did was change my sensitivity over and over again until I found values that actually worked for me on console. And since I know a lot of you guys out there are console players yourself, I thought it'd be a good idea to share those values with you. Plus, even though I play on Legacy, I was so desperate at one point that I even tried briefly switching to linear, so I'll be sure to show those sensitivity values as well. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so let's start this video off by going over the best Legacy sensitivity for console. So as I've mentioned in previous sensitivity videos like this, when you take a look at the top Legacy players that play controller on PC, you'll typically see their X and Y values in the range of around 6.5 to 7.5, or I guess technically since they changed the way it works now, that would be 65% to 75%. And I've typically kept my values right around the middle of that range for the majority of my Fortnite career. But as I mentioned in the intro, when I hopped on console, those values simply felt way too fast. So at first I tried 65% for both X and Y, and that felt a tad bit too high. Then I kept gradually lowering it until I hit 60% for both, but that felt a tad bit too low. So eventually I settled at 63% for my X sensitivity and 61% for my Y sensitivity. So probably a little bit lower than I'd recommend if you play controller on PC, and therefore it's probably a little lower than you're gonna see most of the top Legacy controller players using. But trust me, the differences between controller on PC and controller on console definitely warrant at least a slight sensitivity adjustment. Moving on to scoped and targeting sensitivity, since these values are actually multipliers of your X and Y, I decided to only barely lower them. I believe before I was on 40% for both targeting and scoped, and I bumped it down slightly to 38% now. Then for my building and editing sensitivity multiplier, I usually rock 2.0 for both when I'm playing on PC, but now when I went on console, I turned those values down slightly to 1.8 for each. The other really important factor for me as a Legacy player on console were actually my dead zones. One of the biggest things that jumped out at me right away when I switched to console was the feeling of an input delay. It just seemed like the game was much less responsive for whatever reason. So one of the ways I tried to combat that was by really lowering my dead zones. I don't remember what exactly they were at before when I played on PC, but I lowered them all the way down to pretty much the lowest value. I used 6% for my left and right thumbstick, and I believe the lowest you can actually go is 5%. I wouldn't say it had a huge effect, but it did make the game feel slightly more responsive, so I was definitely happy with the change. Now, moving on to linear sensitivity, again, I didn't play a ton of linear, but during the time that I did, these were the values that felt best for me. For horizontal and vertical look speed, I use 35% for both values, and for horizontal and vertical boost, I use 0% with a 0-second boost ramp time. Again, lower than what you typically see from a linear controller on PC player, those guys are typically more in the 40 to 50 range for the look speeds. But the one thing I still thought it'd be a good idea to keep the same was actually having no aiming boost. For ADS horizontal and vertical speeds, I decided to go with 12% for both, with a 0% horizontal and vertical boost and a 0-second turning boost ramp time. And finally, for look dampening time, I know a lot of people use 0 for this value, but I felt that I needed at least a little bit of aim acceleration on console, so I used 0.06 seconds for that. And for the dead zones on linear, I wanted to have them a little bit higher than I did for legacy, so I used 10% for both the left and the right dead zone. And now I'll just quickly show my settings that I used on console, even though I really only changed one thing. I have toggle sprint off, sprint by default on, sprint cancels reloading off, auto open doors on, tap to search/interact on, and then for these combat and building settings, most of them are fairly obvious except for confirm edit on release, which I personally have on, and then the only thing I actually changed was setting my colorblind mode to Tritanope with 5 strength. I mentioned this in a recent video, but I heard a few people say that's the best colorblind option for console specifically, so that's what I decided to go with, and it definitely seemed pretty good to me. So that's really all I wanted to cover in this video, and let me know with a comment down in the comment section below. If you're a console Fortnite player, what sensitivity do you currently play on? Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, and now I'll leave you with the rest of this gameplay, and I will catch you guys next time.
Nice.
Dude, this kid has a beam on me.
Oh, I have no mats. He just trapped me.
There's a guy on us. He's okay. Drop me heals, anyone, please.
I need
I
to
don't
know.
On me. Oh, you. On me. Oh.
Right here. To the right. Nice.
Hey, I gotta make it. I gotta make it.
I'll take it.
I have 3.
I broke the guy's shield as above you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go up and test him. Try to kill him.
The guy
Nice.
building up on me on height, on height. I have height still. That's me up here. Found him. This should be the lobby, just about. Dude, he's got a gold pump. It's gonna be fun. I'm just keeping height. He's right here. Now down.
There's 2 guys at Grandma's house. It's gotta be the last 2. They're west.
No, there's more guys west.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah, west. Grandma's house.
I've absolutely
No,
nothing.
nothing.
What the?
Down there, see me down there. Right there, I marked it. Watch out for the guy though.
His teammates there. I killed on that white guy. On your own.
Oh.
I'm getting third party. Do you have any use?
Is there any extra heals they're gone? I have nothing. Energy, how are your mounts looking? Or Dom?
I have 1 build. Hit him.
The guy on the left.
I hit this guy for 105 right here. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the Gronky gameplay. Thanks for coming out and watching.